Professor Mary Metcalfe is an education expert and senior research associate at the University of Johannesburg. She now joins us via Zoom to share some thoughts on how these changes will affect the examination process. Mary, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thank you, Simpiwe.
So how will the change of exam date impact on student preparations?
It's a very small change to the exam timetable. Instead of starting with all learners in the country writing on Monday, the 1st, it just did not possible for them to write on the day of the elections. So the language paper has been moved to Wednesday the week before. Now, most learners in the country will be writing either English as the first language or English as the first additional language. Mm-hmm. And so instead of writing on the Friday, they'll be writing on the Wednesday. There are other smaller language papers being written on that day. But the preparation, there's very little difference at this stage between preparing for Wednesday the 27th or Monday the 1st. It's a very neat solution because to reschedule the rest of the exams for a later start, I think would have been very difficult. Instead, it's just 3 days early with time to study in between. So it's a neat solution. It has the support of all stakeholders, and it's appropriate to do this for the local government election date.
You know, Mary, I suppose that the poor and the rural provinces have a much steeper hill to climb than the urban richer provinces. I mean, if you talk of roads, if you talk of electricity, if you talk of internet connectivity with regards to remote learning, how much of an impact will this have on the learners' preparation for these year's exams?
It certainly isn't going to affect the learners' preparation for the exams in terms of the shift of date. But you are correct that the inequalities in our society are really very clear when we look at education performance, and those have been exacerbated by the impact of COVID-19. So the class of 2021, those learners who are writing the National Senior Certificate, need the support of community and family and schools who are working so hard to prepare them. The results for 2021, we have to understand that this year's grade 12s were in grade 11 last year. They did not receive a full year's instruction, both because of the lockdowns, but also because of the rotational timetable. So what I think we're seeing across the country is huge efforts being made to support the class of 2021.
And then there are those learners that they've missed a significant portion of the school year, and their schools, I suppose, were not able to maintain steady rhythms of teaching and learning. Do they have a point, though?
Well, there definitely is a point that both from grade 1 all the way up to grade 12, our learners have not been able to attend school every day. There's been a focus definitely on grade 11 and 12, making sure that they are able to attend on a daily basis. But because of the demands of physical distancing, many learners have been on a rotational timetable. And what we need to recognize is that this is an international phenomenon. Many countries have not had as much time at school as we have. And many countries are suffering with learning loss. There's international research coming out every day, which shows that learners, because of not attending school, because of the COVID constraints across the world, are not able to learn as much as they would have been able to without COVID. We need to accept that this is going to not be a quick fix at all. It's going to take years of teachers carefully doing two things. Number one, understanding where learners are, assessing in order to understand how they need to teach, but with a goal in mind of ensuring that every learner has the foundational concepts to carry on learning the subsequent requirements of the curriculum. I would love to see primary schools focusing very much on reading and numeracy. And that goes from foundation phase all the way to grade 7, because learners that are confident in reading are better able to master subjects across the curriculum and better able to learn independently.
You know, Mary, it suffices to mention that those learners, who have made it to grade 12 may not necessarily manage that, to achieve the pass rate required for acceptance to a local university. That could be as a result of a multiplicity of reasons, one of which the conditions and the context in which they are being schooled are not conducive for optimal teaching and learning. So whose problem should this be? Should it be the learner's problem, or should the authorities be taken to task because of this?
There definitely are challenges, and as you've indicated, learning at home is a challenge. The infrastructure that is adequate to learning, the availability of books, these were pre-existing problems before COVID. The students who do not have all of the resources that they need to learn successfully require that they are provided with the material, that they learn in conditions such as having the necessary sanitation, the necessary toilets. And it is the responsibility of civil society to say to government, we need to get regular progress reports on what is happening to correct these deficiencies. But we also need to recognize that there are even greater challenges for government because of COVID. Last year, provincial departments had to spend more money than they had even contemplated might be required in terms of personal protective equipment, making sure that the necessary sanitation procedures were in place. And that money didn't exist in the budget, and it had to, in fact, come from the infrastructure budget. So we are in for a harder process of addressing the basic requirements in all of our schools. So it's a question of the responsibilities that we have as citizens to support our children, to support our schools, and also to make sure that we have an understanding of the broader context within which government has to deliver education. Government must be held accountable, but we need to be informed about the constraints under which they will be working.
And you just mentioned, the personal protective equipment, and I know that some of the schools may not necessarily comply with the provisions of the Disaster Management Act in terms of providing protective equipment to the students. And how much of an impact will this have on disrupting the examinations, especially in the poor and the far-flung schools?
I think we must separate the general problems that we're seeing in education from the specific focus on grade 12s.
Okay.
Every year we see huge emphasis on grade 12s and doing everything we can to support them. I'm sure that the conditions of safety under which learners will be writing grade 12 have, as they were last year, been adequately communicated to schools. There've even been provision made for a child who may have COVID on the day of writing to be able to write under separate conditions. So those inequalities are there. The pressures of COVID are indeed there. But one of my strong views in education is that as much as we focus on the grade 12s, we need to focus on primary school learning as the foundation for the Matric results in 7 or 8 years' time. And we need to have a consistent attention to teaching and learning in every grade, from grade 0, from the pre-ECD emphasis, which is crucial in this country, all the way to grade 12. If we were to focus on all of our grades, consolidating fundamental literacy and numeracy, we would start seeing improvements in the results of the National Senior Certificate. But if I just reflect on one of the comments that you made, we need to recognize that there's multiple pathways in terms of learners and career possibilities, learning possibilities other than university. It's a small percentage, relatively, of learners across the country who do receive the bachelor's pass to proceed to compete to be accepted in a university. We need to recognize that there's other pathways, and what children need to do is to leave school with a sense of achievement, a sense of self-esteem, and a sense of hope and confidence that they will be included in society and in the economy. And it's not only the high flyers that we should be celebrating. We should be at home, in communities, at school, in society, celebrating the success of all of our learners, because they all are going to be active contributors to the economy, to family, to society.
In as much as the focus is on the grade 12s and the matriculants, I mean, it's very important, I suppose, to also, focus much attention on the previous on the previous grades, because it suffices to mention, Mary, that these are the feeder grades to the grade 12s, because we know that COVID-19 has further widened the gap between the no-fee and the fee-paying schools, and the no-fee paying schools can't afford at this particular point to migrate to teaching and learning online, as many fee-paying schools have done, to mitigate the disruptions. Just how much of an impact will have on the general quality of education here in South Africa?
There has been research which was presented at the Minister's last press statement, which shows that we are already from foundation phase seeing learners not mastering as much of the fundamental ability to read as we would have expected without COVID. And you are correct that the conditions of inequality will be highlighted under COVID.
Yeah.
The challenge for us as a country going forward is to recognize that these challenges of learning loss, of learning time, and then the learning loss that accompanies this is going to be a project of years of dedicated teachers' focus on supporting learners. As learners approach the Matric, the National Senior Certificate, it becomes almost a fixed goal, because the standard of the National Senior Certificate from year to year must be consistent. All learners must feel, I achieved at this level, and it's the same as learners, it can be compared to what learners have achieved in other years. So the emphasis must be on improving the foundations of learning in primary schools, and recognizing that that's going to take years of careful teachers' work. And as you correctly say, that our efforts must be focused on those learners who come from the poorer schools, because it is education that can make the greatest difference to learners in poorer schools. And that's where we need to have an approach of support that prioritizes conditions of poverty and supporting teachers in those environments.
All right. As always, Mary Metcalfe, it's been lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that was Professor Mary Metcalfe, and she's an education expert and a senior research associate at the University of Johannesburg.